My name is Evie Thorn. I am 29 years old. I work as a landscape photographer based in Christchurch, and most mornings I wake up before the sun and drive out to the peninsula with my camera bag and a thermos of tea and feel for a few quiet hours, like my life belongs entirely to me. This morning was different. I woke up to 34 missed calls, all from a number I had not saved in my phone, but recognized the moment I saw the area code. Wellington. My stomach dropped so fast I had to sit on the edge of my bed and wait for the room to stop tilting. My cat, Biscuit, pushed her head against my knee. The kettle was still warm on the bench from the night before. Outside, the sky was doing that soft gray thing it does before the light decides what color it wants to be. I sat there for a long time without moving, because some part of me already understood that whatever had happened in Wellington was not going to wait for me to be ready. It never had. Some memories do not leave. They just go quiet for a while. Mine had been quiet for almost 14 years, and now, at 6 in the morning, they were all talking at once. I grew up in a suburb of Wellington called Johnsonville. To anyone driving through, it looked like exactly the kind of neighborhood where nothing interesting happened. Semi-detached houses with tidy lawns, recycling bins out on Tuesday, kids on bikes, a dairy on the corner that sold ice blocks and scratchy tickets and stayed open later than it should have. From the outside, my family looked the same as everyone else's. My stepfather, Gareth, worked for a civil engineering firm. My mother managed the accounts for a transport company from a home office that smelled like printer ink and old coffee. They owned their house. They went to school barbecues. They remembered the names of the neighbors' dogs. But the version of them that existed inside the house was something no neighbor ever saw. Gareth had married my mother when I was 5. My biological father had left before I turned 3, and I have almost no memory of him beyond a blurry shape and the smell of petrol. Gareth was the only father I consciously knew. For the first couple of years, he was careful and distant in a way that probably looked like patience to outsiders. He did not hit. He did not scream. He used something quieter and harder to prove, which was the slow, deliberate business of making a child feel like an inconvenience that had been inherited rather than chosen. My mother adored him. Or she told herself she did, which is not quite the same thing. She was the kind of woman who needed someone to orbit around, and once she had chosen Gareth as her center, everything else in her life got arranged around what he thought, what he wanted, what made him comfortable. Including me. I was not badly dressed or hungry or covered in bruises. Nothing that would have made a teacher file a report or a stranger ask questions. What I was, from about the age of 7 onward, was invisible in a way that ached. My stepfather had a daughter from his previous relationship, a girl named Paige who was 3 years older than me, and the difference in how he treated us was so consistent and so complete that I stopped expecting anything different by the time I was 9. Paige got the weekend trips to Queenstown. I got to stay home and water the garden. Paige got the new school shoes at the beginning of every year. I wore the same pair until they split at the sole. When Paige passed her piano exam, Gareth took the whole family out to the Thai place on the main road and let her order dessert. When I came home with a certificate for a regional photography competition at 13, he glanced at it briefly, said that was nice, and went back to watching the news. My mother never contradicted him. I think she convinced herself it was not as uneven as it looked. That is the story people tell themselves when acknowledging the truth would cost them too much. The thing about growing up like that is it teaches you to become very good at making yourself small. I learned how to take up less space at the dinner table. I learned how to close my bedroom door softly. I learned that enthusiasm was dangerous because enthusiasm attracted attention, and attention from Gareth usually ended in some form of humiliation dressed up as honesty. He liked to call it telling it like it is. He called my photographs hobby snaps. He called my grades mediocre even when they were not. He called my dreams about studying photography at university a nice idea for someone without real responsibilities. The day that changed everything was an ordinary Saturday in April. I was 15. My mother and Gareth had planned a day trip to Picton, which meant an early ferry from Wellington and a drive up through the Marlborough Sounds. I had been told the night before that I was coming too. Looking back, I should have paid attention to the atmosphere in the car. Gareth was in a particularly sharp mood, the kind where his cheerfulness had a point to it. My mother kept asking me questions from the passenger seat, small testing questions, the kind designed to make me second-guess every answer I gave. Did I remember to charge my camera? Did I even think about what the weather might do? Did I understand that not everything in life was meant to be photographed, and some moments were just meant to be lived? I answered everything carefully, the way I always did, monitoring the temperature of the conversation, the way you monitor the sky before you decide whether to drive into the hills. We caught the ferry without any trouble. The crossing was rough and cold, and I spent most of it standing at the rail watching the water because being outside felt safer than sitting in the passenger lounge with them. In Picton, we parked near the town waterfront. It was just before noon. There were other families around, a few tourists, a couple of fishing boats coming in. Gareth said he and my mother were going to walk up to the lookout and that I should wait by the waterfront memorial, the one with the anchor outside the small maritime museum. 15 minutes, he said. 20 at most. I stood by that anchor and watched them walk away. The first 20 minutes I spent looking at the light on the water, the way it moved in flat silver sheets when the wind picked up. The second 20 minutes I spent telling myself the walk had taken longer than expected. After an hour, I stopped making excuses for them. I had my camera, which turned out to matter more than they probably intended. I had $12 in my jacket pocket. I had no phone, because mine had broken the previous week, and they had not replaced it yet. I stayed near the anchor because they had told me to wait there. Even at 15, even after years of knowing exactly what they were capable of, I was still following their instructions. That is what a childhood of careful obedience does to you. It makes you comply, even when compliance is what's hurting you. The town was not large. I could have walked the whole waterfront in 20 minutes. But I did not move far because moving felt like the kind of decision that would be used against me later. I bought a can of Sprite from a nearby dairy and drank it slowly on a bench and watched the ferry terminal and tried to think through what I knew. I knew they had a car. I knew the last ferry back to Wellington left in the late afternoon. I knew that if they wanted to, they could drive away right now, and I would have no way to follow. It was not until the second hour that I understood they were not lost. I saw the car first. It passed along the main road, moving slowly, the way a car moves when the people inside it are looking for something rather than rushing toward it. Then, it stopped near the corner, and I saw Gareth's window come down. He looked right at me. He had that expression, the one I had grown up reading, the one that lived somewhere between amusement and contempt. He said something to my mother that I could not hear. My mother turned in her seat and looked at me too. Then my stepfather held up his phone through the open window and took a photograph of me sitting alone on that bench by the anchor with my can of Sprite and my camera bag and my $12. Then the car moved on and disappeared around the corner. I sat very still for a moment after that. The way you go still when your body understands something before your mind has finished processing it. Then I put down the can, picked up my camera, and took a long, slow breath. I did not cry. I had learned not to cry in public by then. What I did instead was think. And the first clear thought I had was that I needed to find an adult who was not connected to them. There was a small visitor information center near the ferry terminal. I walked in and told the woman behind the counter, as clearly as I could manage, that I had been separated from my family, that I was 15, and that I did not have a phone. She was probably in her mid-40s, with short hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she did not ask me any unnecessary questions. She came around from behind the counter and asked if I was all right. I said I was not sure. She said that was a very honest answer. Her name was Sandra. She called the local police non-emergency line and sat with me while we waited. She gave me a glass of water and did not try to fill the silence with reassurance she could not actually back up. When the constable arrived, a young man who introduced himself as Constable Evie Walker and seemed genuinely startled by the situation, he took down the details I gave him and contacted the Wellington police through their communications channel to check on the car registration. The car had already been spotted at the ferry terminal. My stepfather and mother were still in Picton. They had not left on the ferry. They were having lunch at a cafe 2 streets away. I remember Constable Walker's face when he got that information. He had the particular expression of someone trying very hard to remain professionally neutral about something that was making him personally furious. When my stepfather and mother arrived at the information center 20 minutes later, Gareth was already composing a narrative before he came through the door. He said it had all been a misunderstanding, that they had only gone for a short walk, that I had been perfectly safe the whole time and they had always known where I was. He used the word independent 4 times in the first 2 minutes. He said some children needed to learn that the world did not stop turning just because they felt nervous. Constable Walker asked him to clarify why, if that was the case. He had taken a photograph of me sitting alone on a bench before driving away without stopping. The silence that followed that question was one of the most satisfying moments of my 15-year-old life, even though I was too frightened at the time to fully appreciate it. There was a formal report filed. I did not know the implications of that at the time. I only knew that Constable Walker had taken statements from me and from Sandra, and that he had spoken to my stepfather and mother with a very specific kind of politeness that made clear he did not believe their version of events. Before we left the station, he spoke to me quietly and alone, and gave me the number for a youth helpline. He said I could call any time, and the way he said it made clear he meant more than just that day. The drive back on the ferry was the longest 2 hours of my life. My mother sat in the car on the vehicle deck and did not speak. Gareth spent the crossing in the passenger lounge and came back smelling like beer. Neither of them said anything to me directly, but when my mother finally looked at me as we drove off the ferry in Wellington, her expression was not remorse, it was calculation. She was working out what the damage was and how to contain it. That night, I heard them talking in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. Gareth said it had been handled. My mother said she hoped it had not gone anywhere it shouldn't. Gareth said the kid had probably told them some dramatic version and that nobody was going to lose sleep over a teenager who couldn't wait by an anchor for 20 minutes without turning it into a crisis. I lay in my bed and listened and made a decision. So quietly, it barely felt like a decision at all. I was going to leave. Not that night, not that week, but I was going to leave this house and these people as soon as I legally and practically could, and I was never going to let them make me feel like my fear was my own fault again. The formal report from Picton triggered a welfare check from a social worker connected to our school. Her name was Diane, and she had careful eyes and a habit of writing things down without looking at the page. She came to the school rather than the house, which I later understood was a deliberate choice. She asked about home life in a way that was general at first, and then specific in a way that told me she had already spoken to someone who knew something. I told her the truth. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. I told her about the anchor and the car window and the photograph Gareth had taken on his phone. I told her about Paige and the shoes and the photography certificate and the word mediocre. I told her about learning to be invisible. Diane did not promise me anything. She said the report from Picton would be followed up and that there were options she wanted to talk through with me. She said I had done nothing wrong by speaking to the constable and nothing wrong by being honest with her now. That phrase stayed with me for years. You have done nothing wrong by being honest. The school year ended with a family welfare plan in place, which meant regular check-ins from Diane, a requirement for my parents to attend family support sessions, and a formal note on file about the Picton incident. My stepfather hated every part of it. He hated being observed. He hated that there was now a record. He hated that the careful public face he had maintained for years was starting to have cracks in it that other people could see. He never directly acknowledged what he had done. What he did instead was become colder and more distant than ever, which I had not thought possible. He stopped speaking to me at the dinner table altogether. He began to act as though I were a boarder whose lease was running out. My mother floated somewhere between the two of us, which is to say, she stayed where she had always stayed, which was on his side. The person who saved the last piece of me during that period was my art teacher, Mrs. Nagata. She was a compact, energetic woman who wore paint-stained cardigans and had the kind of laugh that changed the temperature of a room. She had seen my photographs from the regional competition the previous year and had started putting them up on the wall of the art room without asking my permission, which at first annoyed me, and then became one of the most quietly significant things anyone had done for me up to that point. Mrs. Ngata started lending me camera lenses from the school equipment cupboard. She entered my work into 2 more competitions without telling me until after the results came in. She wrote me a reference letter for a scholarship program at a polytechnic in Christchurch that offered a foundation course in photography and visual arts. She did not ask Gareth's permission. She asked mine. When the scholarship came through, I was 16. The program did not start until I was 17. I had a year to get through. I got through it the way you get through things, when you know there is a specific end date. I kept my head down. I kept shooting. I stayed out of the house as much as I could, taking long walks through the suburb with my camera, documenting the ordinary details of streets that had never looked at me kindly. Broken fence palings, pigeons on power lines, the old man at the dairy, who always nodded when I came in, even when I could not afford to buy anything. Gareth made one final attempt at control 2 weeks before I was due to leave. He told me the scholarship was irresponsible, that Christchurch was too far, that I would fail and be back inside 6 months, and that the program was not a real qualification that led anywhere. He said all of this in the kitchen one evening, while my mother stood at the sink with her back to us. I looked at him for a long moment. I was 17 years old. I had a bag half-packed in my room, and I had a letter from an institution in another city that had seen my work and believed in it. I said I was going, and I said it in a voice so steady it surprised even me. Then I went to my room and finished packing. My mother came to the door of my room later that night. She stood in the doorway for a while without speaking. Then she said she hoped I would let them know I had arrived safely. Not that she hoped I would be okay, or that she was proud of me, or that she was sorry for any of it. Just that she hoped I would send a message so they would not worry. I said I would. I did not. Christchurch was, in the most literal sense of the word, a revelation. I had not understood, until I arrived somewhere that was genuinely new, that I had spent my entire life operating inside a set of rules designed to keep me manageable. In Christchurch, nobody had any investment in who I was supposed to be. I could be ungainly and unsure and passionate about light falling through a window at a specific angle and not have any of that used against me. The polytechnic was not glamorous. The studio spaces smelled like chemicals, and the heating was unreliable, and the coffee machine in the common room broke twice a semester. But the tutors were serious people who took photography seriously, and being around other students who were obsessed with the same things I was obsessed with felt, for the first time, like coming home to a place I had chosen rather than been assigned. I was not immediately brilliant. My early work was technically competent and emotionally flat, which my tutor, a quiet man named Patrick, told me with great directness in my first portfolio review. He said I was keeping my subjects at arm's length, that every shot told him what a place looked like but not how it felt to stand in it. He said that distance was a choice, and that eventually I would need to decide whether to keep making it. I understood exactly what he meant. I just did not know yet how to stop. Over the next 2 years, something shifted. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in films, with a single breakthrough moment and a swelling score. It shifted the way a landscape changes between autumn and winter, almost imperceptibly until one morning you look up and notice the light is entirely different. I made friends who did not require me to be invisible. I started eating meals that were not eaten alone. I started saying what I actually thought in critiques and found that the world did not end when I did. I started shooting differently, getting closer, staying longer, waiting for the particular honesty that only comes when a subject has forgotten they are being watched. After the foundation course, I applied to a 3-year degree in photography at a different institution and was accepted with a partial scholarship based on my portfolio. I moved into a flat with 2 other students, a ceramicist named Ruetti and a sound designer named Freya, and we split the bills and took turns cooking and had the kind of arguments about dishes and shared groceries that I had never known were available to me. I built a life out of small, chosen things. I graduated at 22. I freelanced for the first 3 years, shooting architecture, editorial work, the occasional wedding when money was tight. I built a client base slowly and then faster. By the time I was 26, I had enough regular work to rent my own studio space and take on the long-form documentary projects I actually cared about. By 28, I had work in 2 group exhibitions and had been commissioned by a conservation trust to spend 6 weeks photographing the recovery of a native bird habitat in the South Island high country. That 6 weeks in the hills changed something in me permanently. Being alone in a landscape that vast and indifferent and extraordinary, with no one to perform for and nothing to manage, I understood for the first time that what my stepfather had called a hobby snap was actually the thing most fully and honestly mine. He had tried to make me small. I had built, in spite of him, a life the size of a mountain range. I did not think of my mother and Gareth often. When I did, it was the way you think of weather from a previous season, with a kind of distant recognition that it had once affected you deeply but did not anymore. I had not returned to Wellington. I had not sent Christmas messages. I had changed my email, and my number after the first attempt at contact came through, about 2 years after I left. My mother had sent a card. Just a card, no letter, with my childhood name written on the envelope in her neat administrative handwriting. Inside, in the same handwriting, it said, "We hope you're getting on all right. Gareth says to say hello. Let us know if you ever want to come back for a visit." I held it for a long time. Then I put it in the recycling. Gareth says to say hello, as though the man who had photographed me sitting alone on a bench in a strange town and driven away was simply a family member sending pleasant wishes. I had no room for it. The 34 missed calls were not from my mother. When I finally listened to the voicemail, at 7 in the morning with biscuit on my lap and my cold tea on the bench beside me, the voice I heard was my half-sister Paige's. I had not spoken to Paige since I was 17. She had been 20 when I left, and whatever she had witnessed growing up, she had been on the other side of it in every way that mattered. She had been the one who got the weekend trips and the new shoes and the restaurant desserts. I had no reason to believe she had ever once asked why I did not. Her voice on the voicemail sounded tired. Not the tired of someone who had been up late, the tired of someone carrying something heavy for a long time. She said Gareth had a serious heart condition, that he had been in hospital for 3 weeks, and that the prognosis was not good. She said my mother had essentially stopped functioning since it started, that she was not eating properly and had not left the house in 10 days. She said she had been trying to manage everything alone and that she was exhausted and did not know what else to do. Then she said the sentence that told me everything I needed to know about why there had been 34 calls and not a single calm, well-considered message. She said, "They keep asking for you, both of them, all the time. They keep asking if you're coming." I sat with my phone in my hand for a very long time after that. Biscuit had migrated to the kitchen. Outside, the sky had made its decision and gone for pale gold, the kind of morning light I usually could not wait to get a camera into. I thought about the anchor in Picton. I thought about the photograph Gareth had taken through the car window. I thought about the word mediocre and the split-soled shoes, and the night I had lain in my bed and listened to them decide that what they had done had been handled. I thought about Mrs. Ngata's paint-stained cardigan and Patrick's directness and Rowetty and Freya and 6 weeks in the high country and my studio and biscuit and the quiet, solid, real life I had built in a city that had nothing to do with them. I called Paige back. She answered on the second ring. We spoke for almost an hour, which was longer than we had spoken in the entire time we had grown up under the same roof. I learned things I had not known, that Paige had seen more than I had assumed, that she had felt the imbalance between us as a child and had not had the language for it, and that becoming a parent herself 2 years ago had brought a great deal of it back, with a clarity she described as brutal, that she had been in counseling for the past 18 months, working through her own complicated feelings about her father. She said she was not calling to ask me to forgive anyone or to pretend nothing had happened. She said she was calling because she was drowning and because she thought I deserved to know what was happening, and because whatever I decided to do with that information was entirely up to me. I appreciated that. I told her so. I also told her I would think about it and that thinking about it did not mean yes. My partner, Daniel, sat across from me at the kitchen table that evening and listened to everything without once interrupting. Daniel is a secondary school science teacher, which means he is professionally skilled at presenting complicated information without drama, and which also means he has the particular kind of patience that comes from spending his days with people who are still figuring out how to be in the world. He asked me what I needed. Not what I was going to do. What I needed. I said I needed to not let them have the ending. He nodded. He understood what I meant. I thought about it for 4 days. I talked to a friend who is a counselor. I went out to the peninsula 2 mornings in a row and stood in the cold with my camera and let the light work on me the way it always does. By the end of the 4th day, I knew what I wanted to do. Not for them. Not because I owed it to Paige, or because illness cancels history, or because blood is supposed to mean something, regardless of how it has behaved. I flew to Wellington because I wanted to say, clearly and in person, the thing I had been carrying since I was 15 years old, sitting alone on a bench in Picton with $12 and a camera and no phone, waiting for people who were watching me from a car window and laughing. The hospital ward smelled the way all hospital wards smell, like disinfectant and recycled air, and the particular staleness of a place where time moves differently than it does outside. Gareth was in a bed by the window. He looked older than I had prepared myself for, though I do not know why I had expected anything different. 14 years is not nothing. My mother was in the chair beside him, and when she saw me come through the door, she made a sound I had not heard her make before, a soft, exhaled sound like something she had been holding for a very long time. I pulled up a chair and sat down. Paige was not in the room. We had agreed on that. Nobody spoke first, which meant I did. I said I had not come because they had asked for me, and I had not come because they were sick, and I had not come to offer anything they might interpret as forgiveness, or a return, or a reopening of a door that had been closed for good reason. I said I had come because I wanted them to hear, from me, in my own voice, what that afternoon in Picton had meant. Not what they had called it at the police station. What it had actually been. My mother started to speak, and I asked her, politely but directly, to please let me finish. I told them what it had felt like to stand by that anchor and watch the minutes pass and feel the particular horror of understanding that the people who were supposed to protect you had looked at your fear and decided it was entertaining. I told them what it had been like to lie in my bed that night and listen to Gareth say it had been handled. I told them what the word mediocre had done to a 13-year-old who had just won a regional competition. I told them about Mrs. Ngata and Constable Walker and Sandra at the visitor center, the people who had shown me, without any obligation to do so, that adults were capable of treating a child with basic decency. I told them about Christchurch and Patrick and my studio, and the 6 weeks in the high country and the exhibitions and the conservation work. I told them about Daniel and Biscuit and the life I had built in a city that belonged to me. I told them I was not angry anymore. That had surprised me too, but it was the truth. What I felt, sitting in that hospital room, looking at 2 people who had become old and diminished and frightened, was not anger. It was something quieter and more complete. It was the knowledge that I had survived what they had done and built something real on the other side of it, and that their approval or regret had not been required for any of it. My stepfather was crying by the time I finished. I had never seen him cry before. My mother was holding his hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Gareth said he was sorry. He said it in a voice so stripped of the usual performance that it almost sounded real. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about the photograph he had taken through the car window, my 15-year-old self on a bench in a strange town, captured like a punchline. I said, "I know you are. I believe that you are. And I also need you to understand that sorry does not reach back and stand beside me at that anchor. It does not give back the years I spent making myself invisible, so you would not notice me enough to be unkind. Sorry is what you have now, when you are frightened. It was not what I had then, when I was." My mother asked if we could start again. I told her honestly that I did not know what starting again would look like between us, and that I was not willing to promise something I could not be sure of. I told her that if she and Paige wanted to find a way to have a relationship, I was open to exploring what that looked like slowly and without pressure. I told her that Gareth and I had said what needed to be said, and that I wished him as comfortable a recovery as was possible, but that I did not expect or want ongoing contact from him. Then I stood up. My mother asked if I would come back before I flew home. I said I would think about it, And this time, I actually meant it. In the hospital car park, I stood in the Wellington wind for a while with my hands in my jacket pockets. The harbor was visible from where I was standing, flat and silver in the afternoon light, and for a moment it reminded me of the water in Picton, the way the surface moved in sheets when the wind picked up. I had stood looking at that water when I was 15, and told myself I needed to think clearly. I had done the same thing now. I was not triumphant. That surprised me too. I had half expected to feel the way you feel at the end of a very long uphill walk, exhausted but clarified. What I actually felt was simply present, solid in my own body, in a way that was hard to describe, like a knot had been untied that I had stopped noticing was there. On the flight back to Christchurch, I thought about the girl who had stood by that anchor with $12 and a camera and no phone, and had still, despite everything, not lost herself. She had kept the camera. She had kept her eye for light. She had kept the stubborn, particular way she saw the world that no one had managed to educate out of her because they had never managed to fully reach it. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched the South Island come into view below, all that jagged, indifferent, extraordinary landscape, and I felt something I had not expected to feel on this day. Grateful, not to them, never to them, but for the fact that whatever they had intended on that Picton waterfront, what they had actually done was prove to me that I could stand alone in an unfamiliar place with almost nothing and still find a way through. They had meant it as a lesson in how powerless I was. It had turned out to be proof of the opposite. Daniel picked me up from the airport. He did not ask how it went until we were in the car and moving, which was the right instinct. When I told him, he listened the whole way home without interrupting. When I finished, he said simply that he was proud of me and reached over and put his hand on mine. That was enough. That was more than enough. There are things I know now that I did not know at 15, standing alone in the wind in Picton. I know that a child who is not protected does not learn independence. They learn vigilance. They learn to monitor every room they enter for the exits. They learn to need very little, so they can never be accused of wanting too much. These are survival skills, and survival skills have their place, but they are not the same as thriving, and the work of a lifetime, for a lot of people who grew up the way I did, is learning to tell the difference. I know that the adults who showed up for me without obligation, Constable Walker, Sandra, Mrs., Nada, Patrick, changed the direction of my life, not through grand gestures, but through simple, consistent decency. They saw me when it would have been easy not to. They took me seriously when there was nothing in it for them. I think about that when I am tired or impatient or tempted to walk past something that is asking me to stop. You do not always know which moment is the one that matters to someone. I know that walking away from people who have harmed you, even when those people are family, is not the same as being damaged or cold or unable to love. Sometimes it is the most honest and self-respecting thing a person can do. You do not have to set yourself on fire to give someone else warmth, and you are not obligated to keep returning to a place that has never been safe just because it once called itself home. And I know this, which is the thing I most want to say clearly, because it took me the longest to believe. The life you build after surviving something hard does not have to be haunted by it. You get to build it with your own hands, in your own city, in your own light. You get to fill it with people who stayed. You get to wake up on an ordinary morning and feel, in the quiet before the day starts, that what you have made is real, and it is yours, and nobody can take a photograph of it through a car window and drive away. Some anchors hold you in place. Some anchors are just the place where you were standing when you decided, quietly and without any announcement, that you were done waiting for people who were never coming back. I was done waiting a long time ago. What I have now is so much better than what I was waiting for.